Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part here, live on Twitter, live on YouTube, like we are each and every single week, 4 p.m. or thereabouts Eastern Standard Time. It is John Sapanaro out in Los Angeles, California, and my co-host, Matt Ibby Ibanez, back in New Jersey. Ibby, it is cold stove season. It is in full swing. It's boring. It sucks. I hate it. How you feeling?
Just to add to that boringness and dreariness over here on the East Coast in Jersey, it's rainy, it's cold, it's just an awful day. And you would think we can come in and it's a Wednesday, be excited, talk some Mets, talk about what's going on, but they're not giving us much to talk about, unfortunately. With the winter meetings around the corner, hopefully things are starting to pick up a little bit more. It seems as though the more you read, it seems like whether it's Ken Rosenthal or Joel Sherman, they're tossing little nuggets here and they're saying, I'm hearing this. Trey Turner looked like he could be going to the Phillies here. And the Mets are talking with Chris Bassett here, or they're meeting with Justin Verlander in a Zoom and all this different stuff. So hopefully it starts to, pick up a little bit more steam and we can start getting some actual, breaking news with people signing places outside of these smaller players taking on minor league deals, or just the players re-signing with their teams.
It would be nice, and for everybody who's watching live, of course, this is Till Mets Do Us Part. The best way to interact with the show is right here, right now, where your comments come in real time. Your questions can be answered by myself and Ibby during the show. On YouTube, especially, where the comments come flying in. Sometimes the Twitter ones don't exactly come in. We don't see them till later. So make sure you subscribe, turn those notifications on so that you can interact with the show. But of course, if you don't have the time to do that, you can always watch the broadcast as soon as we are done with the episode over on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. And if you want to wait till tomorrow, you can kick it old school and listen to the entire show, courtesy of the Chop Sports Network, wherever it is you get your podcast. That is perfect if you're on the way to work or school or running or whatever it is you do, your morning workout, all of that fun stuff. Look, we're trying to stay engaged in this entire situation. I think the best place to start is something non-Mets related, and we won't spend too much time on it, but that is Jose Abreu signing with the Astros. It seems like on paper, it's the rich getting richer, right? Because they won the World Series, they bolstered their offense, they found a first baseman / DH, all of this stuff. But look, he's a little bit older. He did not have a big year last year. Power numbers were down. A lot of people said that he was potentially a piece they'd want to see on the Mets. I wouldn't have hated that, but as a move later. If he was still out there in January, February, I'd say, okay, maybe go on a one-year flyer. All the reports are a 3-year deal. I'm not doing that for a guy like Jose Abreu. To me, Jose Abreu, I loved him. He made a lot of sense for the Mets 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago at the trade deadline. There were times when Jose Abreu was the perfect fit, but I think ever since Pete Alonso showed up, that ship sailed.
Yeah, and I mentioned a couple shows ago when the idea of Jose Abreu came up. I said I would have loved having him on this team for this trade deadline as a half a season pickup, see what can happen. Maybe provide some pop behind Pete, or just to get another righty bat in the lineup. But it didn't happen. Rich getting richer in the sense that it's a loaded lineup there, so he's not expected to be the guy. So it kind of makes sense. When you look at some of his numbers, the things that are a little concerning might be the fact that his presence at the plate in terms of the fastball has been going down the last couple of years. And now you're paying a guy ages 36, 37, and 38. But look, he's going into a ballpark with the Crawford boxes. It's a short porch and left. He might be able to rediscover some of that power. He's going to be batting maybe 6th, 7th in that lineup. And from the sound of it, it seems as though the Stros are not done when it comes to the offense. They could be looking at the likes of Wilson Contreras. They could be looking at the likes of Cody Bellinger. They could use another outfielder. So they're still shopping. Obviously they're going to be in on Justin Verlander until he's not there. So it seems as though Jim Crane is liking the idea of playing GM and flexing that muscle now that Click is out. And he gets to be his best Jerry Jones impression. So he's going to try to do his best to, try to win again. But that team is loaded. And like you said, it is the rich getting richer.
It's funny because I think a lot of those guys that you mentioned make a ton of sense for the Astros. Contreras, most notably, but also Cody Bellinger. A lot of people keep saying, oh, the Mets shouldn't be in on Bellinger because if the Dodgers couldn't fix him, ain't nobody can fix him. But you know what? You could argue that maybe the Astros could fix him. Exactly. So I think that makes sense in a lot of different perspectives. And we got Stevie Mack jumping in the comments early. And this is where I wanted to go next. And we kind of touched on it at the very top of the show. He says, tell them to start the winter meetings earlier so free agency can get going already. I joked on Twitter yesterday or 2 days ago about the fact that we are in the cold stove season. I mean, everybody who's watching this on YouTube, if you saw the thumbnail, it's just a bunch of ice cubes. No players, just the frozen tundra. And I know the Jose Abreu news dropped, and that's great for the Astros. It's great for Astro fans, all of that stuff. But man, it feels like we are in another lockout right now. It feels like we're in a holding pattern. And we talked about it at the time, and I will echo it now. I think it's even truer now than it was last season when we were in the lockout, just hoping that it would end. The precursor to the lockout was the best thing that could have happened to Major League Baseball. It became a frenzy. It became topical. It was front page news. They were actually taking headlines away from the NFL and the NBA and college football and hockey, I guess to a lesser degree, because that's more of a niche sport anyway. But I think the Major League Baseball seriously needs to consider adopting a free agency signing period that goes from, whatever, the last 5 days after the World Series. And then let's say it ends on December 15th, December 20th, something like that, after the winter meetings. This way, to Stevie Mack's point, you don't have to necessarily move the meetings up. You just let it go through the meetings and right before the Christmas break when not a lot of stuff happens anyway. And then I think if you don't sign players by that point, you can't sign them until spring training starts. And a lot of guys are not going to want to wait. Yeah, you might get the Bryce Harpers of the world that are going to wait. I'll wait till January. I'll wait till February. I'll wait. I want to get the best deal. It doesn't matter to me. But a lot of guys are not going to want that. They're going to want to know where they're going for spring, Florida or Arizona. They're going to want to know if they're going to a new team, what that environment is like, getting around the guys. And I think throughout the whole process, there's no limit on trades. So you can make trades at any time because trades develop differently. It just is what it is. But I don't know. Your thoughts on something like that? It's a half-cocked idea that I kind of put together, but I think it makes some sense. I think there needs to be some urgency. This is boring and it sucks, and baseball doesn't get it.
Yeah, we've talked about that multiple times on the show over the last couple of weeks when we talked about how it was coming across as if this stove was going to stay cold, and the idea it's well documented that last year was incredible in terms of the excitement, and baseball doesn't understand. Baseball can never get out of its own way, and we know that to be a fact. Whether it's it doesn't matter what the situation is, whether it's steroids, whether it's adopting something to make free agency more exciting, to put more eyes, to put more positive eyes on their entity that is Major League Baseball. They have a hard time understanding that. But I'm with you. Like, I wish there was something we talked about. I think it might have been last week, just talking about how it's always exciting for the NBA and the NFL when they have these certain periods where you're just getting a litany of moves that are done and excite. You're seeing teams all over the entire league making moves. I think that'd be great for baseball. And it's sad that we were in the midst of a lockout and we had more fun prior to that lockout, mind you, and then we're out of it now. And it's just like, we're back to, being an old lady squeezing our purse, trying not to get robbed, to just, I mean, look, the most difficult thing about the idea is the fact that the Scott Borses of the world are never going to like something like that. And we know Scott Boras does have his hand in baseball, whether people want to admit it or not, because he needs his time. He's going to take as much time as he needs to bring out his binders, to let people know that, look, this is why I want you to sign Brandon Nimmo. This is why I want you to sign Cody Bellinger. This is or whoever else he has under his umbrella. He's going to need that time because when he represents so many players, he's going to be playing the market off of certain teams. Once player A goes here, then he can use that to get player B to go there. So he always needs his time to do that. And that's a lot of agents as well. So that's the one downfall of the idea. I absolutely love it. I want it to happen because last year was incredible. Not only because our Mets were so, integrated into it with so many moves, just the fact that there was pure excitement around the game of baseball, which we don't get to see, especially when you're talking about the likes of football news and basketball news and anything else.
Well, it's funny because, yeah, you did mention Scott Boras and other powerful agents like him. And obviously that's all a factor. And I understand that. I'm not naive to that fact. But it works in other sports, Ibby.
Mm-hmm.
It works. They have free agent signing periods in the NBA, in the NFL. It works, and it works for a reason. Now, I get it. Baseball is an uncapped sport. You're going to go after every dollar. You're going to try to wring that sponge as much as you can possibly wring from it, especially when you're Boras and you're operating at the top and you're operating with upper echelon guys. And like you said, you're representing multiple guys, so you've got to keep all those plates spinning at once. And you also want to say, hey, listen, Houston, you just spent a bunch of money on Jose Abreu, so we know that you might not be in the Brandon Nimmo market, but you might be in the Cody Bellinger market. So, let's talk about it. It's not really playing both sides, but it's understanding the interests of the entire landscape, the entire league, and all of your own clients, and then where your clients relate to other people. So I know it's easier said than done. I just wish baseball would figure out a way to do it because I think, again, like you said, they missed the mark. The expression I always use is that baseball looks for love in all the wrong places. They have this thing that was born out of something bad, out of the lockout. You got lockout eve, right? You got the day before. The calm before the storm was anything but. And even then, Ibby, we couldn't enjoy it because the Mets go out, they make a flurry of moves, they bring in a lot of people, we're excited about it. And then remember this time last year, we're going, well, it would be the Mets. They would sign Max Scherzer, and then baseball would get canceled for the year. So we couldn't, and we didn't think that was going to happen. But there were points when that was really on the table. And so, either way, it's like with baseball, you can't really enjoy it, and it's annoying. And I people are watching now. If you agree with this concept, if you want there to be some free agency signing period or something like that, throw it in the comments. Let us know your thoughts on that. And speaking of, let's jump back into the comments. Stevie Mac saying Boras is the Mariah Carey of sports agents, absolute diva. And then saying, John, your mic is cracking a little bit. Oh, okay. Maybe it's because I was yelling. I'm not 100% sure. Let me know if that keeps up. I had no problems with it yesterday. I'm getting a new computer, so I am running not off my fancy mic, but off of headphones on my iPad. So my new computer is not quite here yet. So we're making do in the meantime. And then Baseball and BBQ saying greetings, and then saying, are you guys going to the QBC on Saturday? Of course, talking about the Queens Baseball Convention. I will be there. I will be hosting it once again, and we're actually going to spend a little bit of the time in the second half of the show previewing some of the stuff for the QBC. So you guys are definitely going to want to hang on. We tried to have Keith Blacknick on, who is basically the man behind the curtain at the QBC, and he wanted to do it, but he told me about an hour before we went live that he's just too busy trying to finalize everything with the QBC. So I've got a great rundown of stuff, Ibby, so we'll talk about it. But the other thing that jumped out over the last several days was SNY putting, I want to talk about these next few things, Ibby, sort of in concert with each other. Okay. SNY puts out a poll, basically. Would you rather have option A, B, C, or D? And option A is running it back. Scherzer, DeGrom, Bassett. Option B is Scherzer, Verlander, and Kodai Senga, the Japanese phenom. Option C is Scherzer, DeGrom, and Senga. And then option D is Scherzer, Rodon, and Bassett. So I just give you, before we get into the nitty gritty, we put out a poll that was similar to this, and obviously the Mets have talked to Bassett. If those are your only four options, A, B, C, or D, which one are you going with?
I'm glad that you brought this up because if you didn't, I was going to bring it up. So I'm glad that you did bring it up.
We don't have production meetings, guys. We just wing this. I'm just kidding.
But no, it's I thought it was so interesting, mainly because when you looked at the results and you read a lot of comments too, whether it was on Twitter, Facebook, wherever, it felt as though, and correct me if you saw differently, it seemed as though that a majority were choosing option C. Did you see the same thing? Did you feel a majority were choosing option C?
I think so. That was my choice, by the way.
Okay.
I picked option C. I actually said option C, and it's not close. Mm-hmm. So I just think that's the best current and future upside version of all three plans.
And I would agree based off the last part you said there because of the upside and the idea of getting a little bit younger somewhere within the rotation. I guess the one thing that I had that was a question because I had mentioned last week where Daniel Wexler pointed out that he viewed Senga coming into the MLB from Japan as more of as a 4, maybe a 3 on a high and a really good 3 depending on the rotation. I guess the whole thing, and I'll throw it to you just to get a take on it. If you're looking at it and saying, well, you know, take the run it back option, right? You look at the run it back option, and it's the same guys. It's Max, it's Jake, it's Chris Bassitt. You're looking at Bassitt really in this situation. If you're looking at Chris Bassitt and what he is and what he's done in Major League Baseball, and you look at the unknown of Kodai Senga and the idea of what you think he might be. Now, age does play a factor here. I'm not taking that out of it. Age does play a factor, but you're looking at it and saying, win now team, trying to take that next step. You could say, well, it didn't work this year. We got to switch it up. I get that argument, but at the same time, I'm also looking at it and saying, I know what X player is. X player being Chris Bassitt as the example. I don't know what Kodai Senga is going to be. Is he going to be Yu Darvish? According to Daniel Wexler, he's not that type. Is he going to be a Daisuke Matsuzaka? He came in like like that flash in the pan, then he kind of just tailed off and didn't really become what they thought he would become. I guess the main thing I'm asking is, do you think an overwhelming majority of people chose option C just because it's something different as opposed to just running it back?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that people are afraid to run it back because the plan that was so vaunted going into last year, quote unquote, failed, right? We saw Scherzer fail. We saw DeGrom fail. We saw Bassitt fail. Hell, we saw them all fail in the same series that basically doomed the Mets' chances to win a division. So I do think some people are stuck on this let's not run it back. And I do think that sometimes change for change's sake is good. Which would be a little bit of this. If you're presenting me with these 4 options, again, I want the upside of Senga. I want the upside of youth and future down the rotation. And we'll talk about the Mets prospects coming up in a little while too. I want a little bit of that more so than I want change for change's sake. So if you give me just these 4 options of A, B, C, and D, my next favorite is option A, is to run it back. One, because I want DeGrom back. To me, that's a non-starter. The other ones that don't include DeGrom, to me, are immediately less attractive. One, because we talked about last week, I don't think Rodon is as good as DeGrom, clearly. And look, Verlander is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Verlander's excellent, but Verlander doesn't have the same, he's older than DeGrom. The same things that you're worried about with DeGrom and Scherzer, you're worried about with Verlander too. So for me, that's not enough. It doesn't move the needle. Now, if you're talking about them being the same age, or if you're talking about adding option E, where you can go Scherzer, DeGrom, Verlander, which some people have talked about, then listen, I'll entertain that conversation. I know you're losing the future aspect, but you are putting 3 potential Hall of Famers at the top of your starting rotation for, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, who knows? So I think a lot of people wanted to change it for change's sake. And I can't argue with them because we all witnessed it not work. I would just say be careful with that because to your point, Ibby, we know what Bassitt is. And Bassitt is a damn good major league pitcher. Yes. Bassitt is a 3 on this team. And you were talking about what Wexler said about Senga. Bassitt's a 3 on this team with DeGrom and Scherzer ahead of him. In other rotations, Bassitt's probably a 2. And Stevie Mack sort of echoing some of those comments. I was torn between Bassitt and Senga, but of course I want DeGrom back. So he's basically saying what I'm saying and also saying that, DeGrom is the guy. He's the linchpin in this whole argument. So for you, I know you went with option C. How do you feel about running it back? Like, what would so you asked me, I want to ask you what your premise is on the concept of like, yeah, you know what? Let's rinse and repeat with these 3 guys who are very good.
I think a lot of times when teams in any sport choose to run it back, like a lot of times you see people run it back when they win a championship. Like the NFL, the Bucks, let's run it back. The Rams, let's run it back. And then it doesn't really work out. Granted, football's a little bit different, but in this instance with baseball, I would say I don't have an issue if they did choose to run it back because these are three very, very good pitchers. I know that it failed at the biggest moment during this last season, but I'm not a person that can wash away what that team did over the course of the season. Granted, it didn't work when we wanted it to, but I would say that my comfort level of running it back is probably a little bit higher in comparison to a lot of other people, because I think that a lot of people want change for change because they think, well, if we just remove this part and then plug this in, we're going to be better. It's going to make us better in the end. Where I like to, I honestly, I can sit here and say to you, straight up that I do not know much about Kodai Senga. I need to do more homework on him. I need to understand him more and what he could potentially bring. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I've been watching the guy for the last 2-3 years. I know exactly who he is. I think a lot of people like
you should talk to Stevie Mack. Don't forget I was talking about Senga before it became cool. But, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. I'm just looking at it, and I think a lot of people do this, especially on Twitter, the internet in general. I think people don't like being the one who potentially misses the boat. So they like to say, hey, oh yeah, I'm all about this guy. This guy's great. And they don't know anything about him. So I think that some people feel as though they want this guy because they see other people talking about him and they want to be a part of that. And I look, again, if they sign the guy, great. I hope he does perform and be what Wexler said, like he could be a 3, which is what this team could use. If you're taking back a Scherzer and a DeGrom, like a younger guy, a couple years younger, can fit in with one of those guys goes down, maybe he can step up. I have no issue with Kodai Senga in that sense, but if you were to ask me, hey, if we're running it back, how do you feel? I would feel fine because I said to you a couple weeks ago, I really liked Chris Paddack when we did our will they, won't they resign? Will they come back? And I said that he won't come back because I didn't think that they were going to front the money for him. That's the whole thing. I didn't think they were going to do that. I thought they were going to spend it elsewhere. But if the rumors are true and they're saying, oh, we're talking with Bassett, we want to bring him back, I understand why they want to. The guy's a damn good pitcher. We watched him be a horse the entire year. I hate how people are taking 1 or 2 starts or one off comment about New York in general and completely burying the guy, where I think he was a horse for this team, especially during the times when Jake wasn't on, wasn't pitching for the team or when Max went down. Like, he really stepped up and he can be that guy. I'm not going to bury him just because of a couple of bad starts. So if they bring him back, I'm not going to be upset about it. I won't. But I feel like a lot of people are just not comfortable with the idea of running it back, even though, and I'll put a bow on it with this, even though like last week I said, if you said to any other fan base that they were signing the number 1 pitcher, number 1 relief pitcher, and number 2 outfielder, they'd be ecstatic. But because they would be the Mets just re-signing 3 guys, they're not as excited because it's not the shiny new toy.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, man. It's hard to argue. I did put out in the comments A, B, C, and D, the choices as S and Y laid them out. Stevie Mack already weighing in. Anybody who jumps into the comments here or, throughout the course of the show, you can simply comment with your preference of A, B, C, or D. Just do the letter version. You don't have to, if you want to elaborate on it, you can, but just trying to gauge where Mets fans are at. And, Ibby, I sort of agree with you in the sense that, the Mets' willingness to spend, and look, I've said long on this show in the offseason that the Mets were going to spend and spend a lot, but the Mets' willingness to look at Bassett while also looking at DeGrom, it kind of reminds me of last year when they were trying to get Gausman and Scherzer. It shows you that the Mets know they're going to need 2 starting pitchers, and they're going to try to go get 2 starting pitchers. Now, I kind of threw this out as an aside. You and I haven't really talked about this, but it has been thrown a lot around Mets Twitter, and I think it does open the door. The reason why I want to talk about this now is because I think the door is open now, knowing that they would invest big money in Bassett, for the Mets to potentially be in the Justin Verlander mix, even if they get DeGrom. Now, I know that's gonna be a lot of money over a shorter period of time, but if you're gonna give Bassett $150 million over X amount of years, you could certainly stomach giving Verlander $40 million over 2 years. Now, I know that's a tremendous commitment in 3 pitchers. You're talking 3 guys that are going to make $40 million each.
Yeah.
But to me, that becomes a little bit more potentially on the table than it was just a few days ago.
Yeah, I think that is like legit pipe dream, the idea of the 3 of them.
Why? No. I'm just kidding. It is. It really is.
But like just looking at it, because look, the fact that you're saying that is not too off base in speaking from what this fan base thinks that Steve Cohen is going to do. They think they're going to have a $20 to $40 million player at every position. It's like, guys, that's not how baseball works. I know the guy's made of money and it's an uncapped sport, but that's not how it works. But in terms of Verlander, I think he's so interesting because he is so accomplished, and he has been turning back time ever since he went to Houston. And I was with you with what you just said now, thinking he would get something like 2 years, 85 to 90 million because of his age. But I'm telling you, I think he's going to wait out DeGrom, and whatever DeGrom signs for, he is going to say, I want that contract. Or he can simply say, I want the Scherzer contract. He can say that because of how accomplished he is. The guy's coming off of a Cy Young. Like he can say that, and it would be hard to argue because of how the market always changes. And we always say this in every sport. It doesn't matter who signs that contract. Once that contract is signed, it sets the tone for every quarterback, every shortstop, every guard. It doesn't matter in the sport. Once that person signs that contract, it sets the tone for that next person. And that person might not be better than that person who signed that, but they're going to say, that's what I want. In this case, you could argue that Justin Verlander is better than Max Scherzer, is better than Jacob deGrom because of the resume that he has put together. So he is going to get, I think he's going to get over $100 million. I think he's going to push for 3 years, which is insane, but I do think he is going to get it. So the idea of having him, look, I said it before, I love Justin Verlander, I do, but if you're asking me to choose, I'm going to take Jake every time because I still think Jake has a lot of life left in his body, in his arm. And yes, the idea of having 3 Hall of Famers at the top of your rotation is very, very mid 2010s Miami Heat with the big 3, but that would be cool. But I think we're looking more so in the lines of Max with Jake back, and then figuring out who that 3 is going to be in terms of a Bassett or a Senga, or if they really want to be cool and just throw money at Carlos Rodon, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah. Well, and that's the funny thing is, look, I admit that Verlander, Scherzer, and DeGrom is a pipe dream. It is probably too much, and it's most likely not going to happen. But like I said, to set it up, I just think the Mets are showing a willingness to spend. The Mets are showing a willingness to invest. And like Stevie Mack just said here a moment ago, they're doing their due diligence with both free agency and possible trades. They're definitely trying to leave no stone unturned in their approach. And maybe this is what I wanted to segue into next, because look, I always get on the negativity of Mets Twitter, but I didn't argue. I said something to somebody today. He was like, look, I think the Mets are, they're not going to go get Nimmo. They're not going to do this. They're not going to do that. It looks like they're going to have the trade deadline all over again. And I'm like, what about Steve Cohen's ownership or Steve Cohen as a person leads you to believe that this guy is simply not going to do anything, or that the money is going to be a factor in doing it? Like you said, not unlimited money. We're not talking about, a $500 million payroll. We're not talking about an absurd number. But there's nothing about Steve Cohen's ownership of the New York Mets that would lead you to believe that this guy is not going to go all in with respect to what this sport is. And look, Like you said, it was like 11 minutes after free agency opened, they re-signed Edwin Diaz to the richest contract a closer has ever gotten. So it's like, Mets fans, if you don't, like, what are you watching? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're not watching this, now look, they're not going to get everybody. They're not going to have a $20 to $40 million player at every position. Like you said, true. But if you don't think they're going to go out and spend some money on some quality players, what are you watching? What have you been watching?
And, just to double down on something that I said over the last couple of episodes, especially when it came to the actual build of what this offseason could be. Look, I know I'm saying right now that the idea of like the Verlanders on top of like those are huge contracts and a lot age-wise specifically. But if I would not be shocked if they paid both DeGrom and say they got Rodon. And I say that because of the age factor and the fact that they know that they need some youth within the rotation. And the reason I say that is because of my thought process of, if you're not going to get the power that you need within the lineup, being Aaron Judge, if you're not going to get that, if you're not going to trade for an Ohtani, if you're not going to trade for a Rafael Devers, if you're not going to do those things, then you're going to double down on your pitching. So in that case, then yes, I could see them attack two prominent big arms on the market, similar to what they did last year when they tried to bring in Scherzer, which they did on top of Gausman. So that plan could still happen. It would be, I think, more towards the younger of the arms. But would it shock me if they brought back DeGrom, brought back Bassett, and signed Senga? Like, it wouldn't shock me. Like, it's possible, because I think that that's a way that they're saying we're choosing to attack and build our team this way because we're not going to get the Aaron Judge of the world. So we're going to build this way instead. So that is something that I do think could happen. But like I said, there's so many ways when you like really sit down and look at it, there are so many ways that this team can choose to build. I think the opening domino is going to be Jake, and how they choose to pivot from that point is going to really show us where they're going to go with the rest of this offseason.
That's a very interesting hedge, because in that situation, you're basically replacing Taijuan Walker with Senga. And at worst, you want him to give you 4 production, which would kind of be in line or a little bit below what Wexler said you're probably going to get out of a player like Senga coming over from Japan. But then on the flip side, the ultimate positive is you get somebody who's got electric stuff, and maybe he's not a 1, but maybe he's a future 2. And now all of a sudden you're dealing with, you have this guy at a quote unquote bargain, at least in terms of baseball. Ibby, before we head into the break, and when we come out of the break, we're going to talk about, the shakeup that the Mets made in the coaching staff. We're going to talk about the top 15 prospect list that came out from, MLB Pipeline, and also some stuff with the QBC. But I did want to end the first half on this, because we're talking about free agents. We're talking about would you rather, this scenario, that scenario, A, B, C, D. And this is a poll we put out on our Twitter last week, which was, would you rather have, if you couldn't mix and match, DeGrom and Nimmo or Rodon and Turner? 80% overwhelmingly in favor of bringing back DeGrom and Nimmo, which to your point would be quote unquote running it back. Are you surprised that is such an overwhelming positive for bringing back both of those guys, when yet it seems like people aren't so keen on bringing back all 3 starting pitchers? Does that surprise you?
I will say, because it's Twitter, it is a little surprising to me. I mentioned how I brought that question was brought up in our Facebook community, and the overwhelming majority chose Nimmo and DeGrom. Now, granted, I feel like I've been able to cultivate a much more positive environment for our group. So people are a lot more keen on the idea of running it back or Mets for life, like those types of things. But in terms of this, look, I also think the question, or the thought process, has to be the idea of, the fact that if you were to sign a Rodon and a Turner, you're giving up those draft picks, you're giving up the international money, you're losing a lot to sign those 2 players. Now, granted, 2 great players, not taking anything away from them, but I do think that, for as many Mets fans that there are that are against the idea of just re-signing your guys and trying to go for it again with the same team, I do think a lot of people realize that, what I said before or what I said last show, where it was, I could argue that Turner and Nimmo are a little bit closer as opposed to a healthy DeGrom and Rodon. And I can say, or I should say healthy DeGrom, healthy Rodon, because look, they've both been banged up.
Yeah, it's all fair.
It's all fair. So it's like, well, it comes down to which pitcher are you choosing? I think that poll is indicative of the idea of people do not want Jake to leave. That's what I think that's about. I didn't even think that they were looking at the bats. I think they were simply looking at which side. So I can only have one. Okay, I'm picking the side with DeGrom because I do not want DeGrom to leave. Whether that is a younger fan who's fallen in love with the fact that he has won so much, or he's been so accomplished as a starting pitcher with the Cy Youngs, whether that's the older fan who says, I saw this happen with Seaver, I don't want to see it happen again. So those are all potentials, but I think that it really came down to people saw DeGrom. They said, I can't mix and match. I'm picking the DeGrom side.
I agree with that completely. I actually don't even have anything to add because it goes so much in line with everything I said about DeGrom before, from the 4 options from the SNY poll and what Stevie Mack said earlier, where he was like, look, I was torn on this, but for me, it's a DeGrom or bust. I want DeGrom back. And we're going to head into the break here in a second. But speaking of Stevie Mack, been very active in the comments, says it covers your butt too, bulking up on starters now with Max only having another year or 2 on his deal and DeGrom's health issues as well. That's basically in response to your, you could see the Mets signing Jake, signing Bassett, and then still trying to bring in a guy like Senga if they're not going to be able to get the offensive playmaker that they think they can try to get. So all of that is great. Ibby, we're a little bit over 30 minutes, so I think we should head into the break. For everybody watching for the very first time, don't worry. It is just a quick 10-second ad spot, and we will be right back. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, till Mets do us part. We'll see you guys in a second. Yo, just like that, we are back. Till Mets do us part. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, doing our best to talk about the Mets here in a post-Thanksgiving world where not a lot of stuff has happened for the Mets. Not a lot of stuff has happened in Major League Baseball because they continue to miss the mark in terms of free agency and trying to figure out a way to make it a little bit more exciting. Maybe, I don't want to go back to the first half of the show and beat this dead horse, but I remember, not that long ago when I was in my teens, certainly, which is a while ago now, but even into my 20s, only about a decade ago, where the hot stove was exciting. The hot stove, things happened. Things happened leading up to the winter meetings. Things happened during the winter meetings. And it's just been a false start. And it's just really, it's boring that we have to talk about some of the things that we're talking about on this episode in great detail in terms of hypotheticals. I would love to break down, man, the Mets signed Senga instead of Bassett. Let's really talk about that. I'd love to talk about it with some concrete terms rather than in the hypotheticals, but here we are. And for everybody watching, of course, we're live on Twitter, live on YouTube. And if you can't watch us now, you can catch the entire broadcast as soon as we're done over on our YouTube channel. You can also follow us for all kinds of updates at Till Mets Do Us Part on Twitter, at Till Mets Do Us Part on Instagram, and my handle and Ibby's handle are at the bottom of the screen, so you can follow us on both of our social media platforms as well. Try to stay very active in that space. We got a few more comments coming in. Baseball and BBQ says, break, and then follows it up by saying, that was quick. And for those of you who haven't been watching the show for a very long time, you're not going to get those jokes. It's a little literal inside baseball, but I do think it's important to shout out our listeners and viewers who are kind of with us and going each step of the way with us here. Ibby, probably the biggest news for the Mets, and one of the bigger news in the last week in terms of Major League Baseball, is that the Mets have promoted hitting coach Eric Chavez to bench coach hitting Eric Chavez. He replaces Glenn Sherlock, and obviously he's a very accomplished Major League Baseball player, but you look at what he did off the field. He was a special assistant with the Angels and with the Yankees before coming over to the Mets. And of course, the common thread there is our current GM, Billy Epler, who hired him in both of those instances. So he clearly loves Eric Chavez. Your thoughts on Eric Chavez getting elevated to bench coach? And of course, Jeremy Barnes taking over for him as hitting coach.
I mean, the biggest thing I think coming out of it was that Barnes was a was in high regard for a lot of teams who they thought they might try and poach him away. So they figured, well, maybe it's time to bump up Chavez to bench coach, and we can keep Barnes as our hitting coach, and we keep him in house. I also think the idea of Eric Chavez learning under the tree of Buck Showalter is something that they want, because once Chavez got these jobs, he started becoming more and more talked about within baseball as someone that could potentially be on the bench for a team within the coming years. And maybe this is a potential succession plan at some point once Buck is done. Now, no, I'm not kicking Buck out the door. Guys, what manager of the year? But the idea is, if you can have someone, under that tree, will he stay long enough, obviously, to eventually take that mantle? But I think that could be a potential thought process. But I also think a big part of it was the idea of trying to keep Barnes in house, because they didn't want to lose him. So trying to keep that continuous nature of their staff together. So I think it's great. I have no issue with that. Granted, I was going to say to Ant Rivera from Subway to Shea, I was going to say to him, like, we got to get you back on, because we should break this down in full, because we had him on last year during the lockout to talk the red hot news of Glenn Sherlock becoming the bench coach. Now the guy's ousted, so now we're bring it back to talk about how he's gone.
I forgot about that. We should have him on. We should have had him on this episode and just did 45 minutes on the bench coach hiring again.
But yes, dark times, but fun times. Dark times, but fun times. But yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's good for the team, and it really feels like the team in general really took to Chavez. And now, is it going to change much because he's not the hitting coach now? I think everyone's there. Everyone's there to help. It doesn't really matter. Everyone's still going to have that ear to bend, if you will, if they need some help with something. So all in all, good stuff.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like Ron Washington, like whether he's a first base coach or a third base coach or the manager. Ron Washington loves teaching people how to play infield, and he's really good at it. And I think, look, does he have more free time to do it when he's a first base coach instead of the manager of the team? Sure. But you think he's going to stop instructing people on the thing that he's best at instructing people on just because he's got a role? I don't think so. So I think that's a good point. Baseball and BBQ saying grooming Chavez to take over for Buck in a few seasons, kind of echoing what you said. And I think that's a big part of it, Ibby. I think what we're looking at here with the Mets is what the Mets refused to do under the Wilpon ownership. Everybody always talks about letting David Stearns walk. Right? Everybody always talks about how Omar Minaya was like, this kid's bright. We got to create a position for him. Jeff Wilpon was like, no, we don't need to do that. Get him out the door. It doesn't matter if we lose him. And now some Met fans would literally, sell their children to bring David Stearns back to run the Mets. So I think this is twofold for Eric Chavez and for Barnes. I think Barnes was probably going to get poached, like you said, if they didn't elevate him to hitting coach. And I think that not that Chavez was going to go anywhere, but I do think, Ibby, there was a little wink, nod with Eric Chavez in this role, because if we go back to last season, you'll remember Eric Chavez basically accepted the hitting coach role with the New York Yankees. And then like a half an hour later, they were like, oh, no, actually, he's accepting another role with the Mets that's different. But then it turns out it wasn't different. So I think there was a little bit of, hey, come in here. We're going to have a veteran manager. We're going to have a veteran bench coach. And then we're going to have you do what you do best, or what you've been known for best, which is hitting coach. We're going to have you kind of be there and then slowly grow under these two people. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, my biggest problem, if you could say anything, with the Buck Showalter hiring, which wasn't that much after the fact, but was that they didn't pair him with somebody younger who could potentially take over. They ran it back with a guy who had already been in the organization. And to me, I didn't see the value in having Sherlock sitting side by side with Buck Showalter. But now, here we are a year later, and all of a sudden the picture becomes a little clearer. Chavez gets to learn from not one guy, but both of them about that role. Now he elevates to it. So I think very much they are grooming him for a potential. I don't think it's imminent. I don't think Buck, Buck is youthful. Buck's got a ton of energy. But I do think that at some point, Ibby, the Mets are going to look for their next manager, and I think it very well could be Eric Chavez.
Absolutely, and look, I think this is always a smart thing to do. Now, it doesn't always mean that just because you put someone under somebody else that they're going to, stay that entire time and wait it out. And a lot of times guys get opportunities, they get offers, and then they jump ship. Like another one that I can bring up is who was it? The Houston. What was his name? The other guy that we thought that the Mets might get that you wanted, Espada, Joe Espada.
Joe Espada.
He's still in Houston, right? He didn't take the Marlin job. I think he's still in Houston. So the idea of him waiting it out behind the Dusty Baker, who still wants to come back, but that's a guy that knows, why would I leave this spot? This is a ready-made team. Once Dusty's done, I can just move up to that next spot and I can be that guy. Like, there's a lot of things that make sense there. So you just wait it out, and eventually you walk into a pretty cherry gig. So the idea of that is obviously there. If the Mets can continue to build this entire infrastructure and build this team up to be a consistent winner, then the idea of this job being attractive for someone to just wait it out becomes that much more. And if Eric Chavez proves that he is ready for that next step, I think eventually he could step into that role.
Yeah, and it was Skip Schumacher who took the Marlins job.
So
yeah. Stevie Mack saying apparently Beltran turned down the bench coach job, so this move makes a lot of sense. There were some whispers a couple weeks ago. We really didn't dive into it because it wasn't kind of all over that the Mets approached Beltran with the possibility of coming back to the organization, kind of righting that wrong from a few years ago, and it wasn't something he was ready to do at this time. And I kind of understand why if you're Carlos Beltran. Look, do I think Beltran could learn from Buck under Buck? Yeah, I think the same thing applies to Beltran that applies to Eric Chavez. I just think after you were already hired and named the manager, it's kind of weird to come back as not the manager. I also just think not that there's bad blood, because I think it was a great olive branch and a great gesture for them to try to bridge the gap. I just think it's maybe just a little bit too soon for him at this point. And baseball and BBQ says, and Chavez gets a raise. Nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with folks getting raises. Speaking of people, maybe not getting financial raises, but hopefully at some point as they come from the doldrums of the minor leagues and make their way into the major leagues, but certainly getting elevated. MLB Pipeline released their top 15 Mets prospects as in fairness, the Mets prospect farm system continues to kind of move up in the ranks little by little. It's been a snail's pace, but there's improvement time over time.
Yeah.
So we'll put the list up here. Obviously, Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty maintain their prospect status, even though they and Mark Vientos as well, even though they've all been to the major leagues, and all the way down at number 15, Jose Buto as well. Is there any name on there that jumps out at you? Any name that surprises you? Any name that you want to see more from? I know we talked a lot as the season winded down with Vientos and why the Mets weren't calling him up, and Alvarez, why the Mets weren't calling him up, and Beatty. And so I know those guys are probably going to have lingering effects, but I'll put it back up. Is there anybody up here that you're like, oh, I want to see this, or this guy I love, or whatever it is?
When I look at the list, obviously the top two are, I'm really excited to see what the future holds for Alvarez and Beatty. I'm very shocked. I shouldn't say shocked, but I think it just goes to show you that sometimes Mets fans overrate their farm system, especially when they're trying to make up deals as they're trying to play GM on Twitter. But the fact that Kevin Parada, just drafted, already becomes the number 3 overall prospect, I think it's very interesting. Alex Ramirez, the fact that he's been really working his way through this system and could be a potential future center fielder for this team. He's really starting to come into his own. I'm excited to see what the future holds for him. And a name that we say a lot, a name that we have been saying for years now, and the fact that he's tearing the cover off the ball right now, and I don't know what the hell to think of him. Ronny Mauricio did the same thing last year as well, tearing the cover off the ball during the winter. And, I think he's batting well over 300. He's got 28 RBIs right now. I think he's 10 ahead of the guy next to him at the moment. 4 home runs, just really ripping it. I'll throw it to you real quick. When it comes to Ronnie, we've said a lot on the show in the past that we don't know what his future could be. We don't know what position he would play. But if there's one thing I could say as a coach of kids that play baseball, and just as a fan, if a kid can hit, you're going to find somewhere to hit. You're going to find somewhere to play him. If a player, Daniel Murphy, guy couldn't play the field, but he can hit, you're going to find a way to get him in the lineup. There is a DH now, so that kind of helps things. But when I look at someone like Mauricio, it's like he's always been trade bait. And for for all we know, he still might be. We don't know. But when you look at him, like what do you do with someone like this who is tearing the cover off the ball? You need offense. I'm not saying he's the answer, but like, what do you think his future could potentially be on this team?
Before I address that, I just want to jump into the comments. Baseball on BBQ says, "What happened to Nick Plummer and Khalil Lee?" Look, Nick Plummer, great story last year, great depth signing. Yeah. And Khalil Lee, I think, is still a guy who's got some upside and some ability, but I think we're better off as an organization if neither one of those guys are on your top 15 prospect list.
He's getting better.
Yeah. That said, look, Ronnie Mauricio, and I think I'll keep putting this up so that people have a visual aid to kind of respond to. Mm-hmm. I think Ronnie Mauricio is still, in a way, the quote-unquote odd man out of this equation. Because I think one way or another, he's not going to play shortstop. You have Lindor. Right now, you still have Jeff McNeil playing second base. You've got the likes of Jet Williams, who's also coming up as a shortstop prospect. You also have Brett Beatty, who's going to block him at third base. I just think someone from that group has to get moved. And to go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, look, we're in a situation where the Mets have a lot of money to spend, I believe, in order to keep their team this good, and I think they will spend that money. But like you said, I mean, they're not going to have $20 million to $40 million invested on each and every single position. And that's when you start to look at this list and you start to say, okay, who can play immediately? And if not, who can we use to go get somebody? So when I look at it, either Brett Beatty's got to go or Ronnie Mauricio's got to go. I don't want to see Alvarez go because he's the top prospect in all of baseball. So maybe Parada is the guy that goes. Mm-hmm. So to me, I love what Mauricio's doing. I know that Mauricio had a bit of a, I don't even want to say a down year or so. It's just like I don't think he rose the way people thought he would rise, and he saw other prospects kind of pass him over. And then what we were left with was, oh, well, this guy's out. And it's like, well, do you realize how young this guy is? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that I want to get rid of him. I'm just saying when you look at that list, it is very heavy in certain positions. And eventually you're going to have to move somebody to make it make sense.
And that kind of just bleeds over into, did you see I think it was Jim Bowden today put out that thing talking about the 8 different teams that have the farm systems to make that would be able to construct potential big deals, whether it's during this offseason or during the deadline. Did you see that today?
I didn't see that. I try to not look at anything Jim Bowden posts. Just kidding.
No, believe me, a lot of stuff he's been posting has been god awful. But he put the Mets in there as a team that could potentially have that type of farm system where they could construct a deal to get a bigger player to come in. And look, I don't disagree with that. I think that it is proper. I just think that this team is very much in that holding stage where they don't want to give away the talent. They want to continue to build it. But you're kind of in that spot where it's like, well, if you have the opportunity to get a Shohei Ohtani type, if you have the opportunity to get a Rafael Devers type, like, do you bite that bullet and trade prospects to then sign that, bring that player in with hopes of signing them and, fixing one of your problems? Look, some of those guys can be dealt. Do I think that they're going to package 5 players like we talked about previously when we talked about Ohtani? Are they going to package those 5 players to try and get someone, or 3 of your bigger players to try and get someone? I don't know if they're going to do that. I really don't. Look, I think that
they probably won't, Ibby, honestly, because just not to interrupt, but just on the probability, like, you're only going to make that deal at this point. Juan Soto's been traded. Mm-hmm. You're only making that deal for Shohei Ohtani. He's the only person, because look, even Devers, and I love Devers, I think Devers would be a great fit on this team. Devers is not going to get the package that Ohtani would command. I think it'll be slightly less. I think Trout, if you were going to investigate that, I think he's going to get less because he's signed to a huge deal already. And obviously there's some market certainty there, but there's also, hey, look, this guy's making a ton of money and he was hurt last year and there's a back and all this stuff. So I think the likelihood of a deal like that from the Mets is very small, because I think you're only making it for one person. And when you do that, you can really eliminate the likelihood of that happening.
The one that I could see, and the only one, like, I know we talked about Ohtani, but I don't think that's going to happen. The one that I could say is I could comp Devers to an extent to Lindor when he had the 1 year left. Look, I still like to think that the Red Sox are gonna, get their head out of their ass and just pay the guy because they should, because he's that damn good and he should be the cornerstone of their franchise for the next decade. But if they don't want him, I could compare the Devers situation to Lindor in that you don't have the leverage. It's 1 year. You're going to have to settle for a little bit less. And he's that player. He's damn good. But like you say, he's not the Ohtani type where someone could really stronghold you and say, or strong arm you and say, hey, this is Shohei Ohtani. Like, hey, this is Rafael Devers. Like, no, I know it's Rafael Devers, but I'm only going to give you, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, and, whoever, Calvin Ziegler. Like that, look, that would still be big for the Mets system based on how it's constructed, but it's one that could potentially make sense. Now, other teams have better systems. They could come in and get the guy as well because they have just better prospects. But the idea of that could be there, but I don't think that they are going into this saying that we're going to give up though it's getting better, I don't think they're going to be giving up a lot of said prospects because I don't think they have much to really give. So I think they want to keep on building and just trying to establish, again, that Dodger model of trying to rinse and repeat and bring guys up, and they call someone up and then they got another guy already replacing him at that level. So it's that well-oiled machine. I think that's what they're trying to get to. But that means you're going to have to spend money. And we do think that they are going to spend money because we think that the payroll can reach upwards of $340+ million this year. So, it's interesting. There are a lot of names on that list that I do like, that I am excited about. Do I think some of them can be dealt? It's possible, but I think they're really going to try their best to hold on to these names.
I think so too. Outside of the, trading one or two guys from the top 15, one or two guys from the top 20. I think when you look at a move like that makes you better at the major league level immediately, I think there's a possibility there. I don't think we're going to see this tear everything down move where not tear everything down, but we're going to mortgage the farm to go all in on a player. I also think I don't trust the Angels to be a competent franchise. Look, the Angels should trade Shohei Ohtani, but I don't think they're going to. I do not think they're going to. And worst case or best case, whatever, for them, I think they might trade him maybe at the deadline if they have another stinker year where they know they're not going to be able to bring him back. But then if you're the Mets, why are you doing that? Because he's going to go to free agency. And then if you want to throw money at somebody, throw it at him. So I just don't see that situation playing out that way. Stevie Mack saying Mauricio has been playing third in the Winter League, which is interesting. And I think that's just to show his versatility and his value because, look, he's not playing shortstop here. And right now, the Mets have, you could argue, a need at third base. Look, Escobar was great in the last 2 months of the season. Before that, he was bad, but he's only got another year on his deal. Everybody loves Brett Beatty, but what is Brett Beatty really? I'm not sure. I think he's going to be really good, but I don't think he's done anything that shows you he's markedly better than Ronnie Mauricio. So I think that's where the opening is. And then Baseball and BBQ saying, I think Mauricio is the most likely to be traded. He may bring back the most at this point. I think he may bring back the most in terms of players the Mets are willing to deal, Ibby, because I think going back to the list, and I hate to keep putting it up, but just to give people the visual, I don't think the Mets are willing to trade Alvarez. I think that's clear. I think the Mets would trade Beatty, but only in a deal that gets them a third baseman where they don't have to worry about it like a Devers. And then I think Alex Ramirez, when you look at it, however you slice it, dude, the Mets are going to need an outfielder sooner rather than later. You've got Canna. He's here for one more year. You've got Marte. He's here for 3, but he's going to get older, and you're going to want to, get some youth in there. And we don't know what's going to happen with Brandon Nimmo, but even if they bring him back, there's going to be an opening sooner rather than later. And if you look at it, it's pretty barren after Alex Ramirez in terms of the outfield in their top 15. So I think to go back to the comment from Baseball and BBQ, I think Mauricio is the most likely to be traded of the players that the Mets are willing to trade.
I would agree with that. I think, especially if he keeps on, doing well like he is right at the moment, that could then trigger the idea of someone saying, hey, well, maybe we could use this guy. Maybe he could be a third baseman for us. Maybe he could be a corner outfielder for us. Maybe because I don't think he has the frame. Well, scratch. I shouldn't say he doesn't have the frame as a shortstop because I'm watching O'Neal Cruz out there being a freaking giant, and he's
Yeah.
a fantastic shortstop. But look, he's not O'Neal Cruz. But point being, I think the idea of saying that someone doesn't have the body type anymore is kind of a hard thing to say when you see something like that. But point is, I do think that it's weird because he's always been the guy that people throw around in a trade offer. He's always like the linchpin. And it's like, look, I think Ronnie Mauricio is a good ball player, but I don't know if he's going to fetch what people think he's going to fetch in a deal. I'll put it this way. I wouldn't be shocked if Ronnie Mauricio was a part of a deal that brought back a reliever or two from like Tampa. That wouldn't shock me if it was something like that. I don't think he's going to be the centerpiece to bring back something larger to the team unless he's packaged with a bigger prospect.
I could see Mauricio. You bring up the Rays. I could see Mauricio being the headliner of a package for a player like Tyler Glasnow. The reason why I bring that up is because Glasnow, as good as he is, coming off of an injury, 29 years old, making a lot of money on a one-year deal. And look, it seems like the Rays, being the Rays, probably won't re-sign him after this year, right? So I don't think, I stand by what I said going back a few weeks. I don't think Glasnow is getting traded before the season. I think maybe at the deadline if the Rays underachieve. But I think you could see that because, again, look, the Rays are a savvy organization, and they might turn around and say, no, we love Ronnie Mauricio. We think Ronnie Mauricio could be a shortstop, or we think Ronnie Mauricio could be our center fielder, or we think whatever. And so, they might just like him the best. And I think he's still got a high ceiling enough as a prospect where he could be had for a guy like that. But it has nothing to do with the ability of the player that's coming back, Ibby. For me, it's more of the other factors. It's coming off of the injury, being 29, not 25, already about to make money and needing to be re-signed, coming from the Rays who probably aren't going to re-sign him. I think in a perfect storm situation, I could see Ronnie Mauricio getting that done. But otherwise, I tend to agree with you. I think he would need to be the second prospect, not the leading prospect in a deal.
Yeah, I think I would say it would be like if you're looking bigger, to bring it back to that whole Devers idea. I know that somebody posted, I think it was MLB.com a couple weeks ago, talking about a potential Devers to the Mets deal, what it would cost and things like that. I think it would be something along the lines of Brett Baty, Ronnie Mauricio, and somebody else. Those would be the two headliners, and then you might throw in two lesser. That's me basing it off of the idea of what the Lindor trade was. Something along
interesting too, because you'd be trading two third basemen to get a third baseman, which is what the Mets did in the Lindor deal, was trade two shortstops to get a shortstop. But it makes sense because if you're getting a long-term solution at that position, suddenly you don't need two prospects there. Right. I think there's something to be said about that.
Absolutely, and we talked about. I think I mentioned it last week when we were talking about Baty and the idea of what his role might be this year for this team. And I had mentioned the idea of he might be someone that they might use him as a rover. It's probably not the best idea as for a young player, but he might be. And I know that they did use him in the outfield when he was down in Double-A. So, that could be something that is, a potential for him as well, being a potential left fielder. But, it's going to be interesting. But again, to bring it back, to bring the whole thing home when it comes to the prospects, I love where the system is. I love where it's going. If there's one thing I would say, it's the fact that they still need a lot of help when it comes to the pitching side. You look at the top guys, of that 15, if you could just bring that list up one more time, I think of those 15, 10 of them are position players. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so 8 of the 15 are position players. Look, I think the system is low in terms of the upside of what the starting pitcher can be. Look, I like the idea of Blade Tidwell. I think Calvin Ziegler can be something. I have no idea what Matt Allen is anymore. Guy hasn't pitched in 2-3 years. I have no clue what he can be. And a lot of the other guys are on the lower end of the spectrum. So it's I want the pitching to start developing a little bit more. I love what's coming out of the out from underneath in terms of the hitting. So hopefully the pitching can pick it up a little bit, but in terms of the overall system, I feel like they're finally in the right direction. And, being ranked within that top 15, top 12 is a good place for them. And hopefully that they continue to move up.
Yeah, that's about where they are. Depending on which list you look at, they're somewhere between 12 and 15. With another good draft, or maybe a savvy trade or two. Maybe one of these trades brings back, like if they go and they get somebody, but it brings back, a piece that the prospect people like. It's a couple prospects for a major leaguer, but also a prospect that comes back in the deal. So look,
and the fact of the people that could be potentially leaving. Those are more look. They're not going to be the higher end draft picks because they went over the money and they went over the tax and stuff like that. So they're not going to get the normal compensation if they do lose. If they lose a Jake, if they lose a Bassett, the fact that they're going to get something back in terms of helping the system, they could really clean up in those third and fourth rounds and further fill out the depth that was really stripped of this system when Brodie Van Wagenen was in charge. So there are good things. I know. Don't say that name. I know. We don't say his name. I know. But
he's Voldemort on this show.
I should say there are good days ahead when it comes to this Mets system. A lot brighter than what they were, say 3, 4, 5 years ago.
I agree with that. And look, we got to get out of here in a few minutes, but I did promise that we would talk a little bit about, excuse me, the upcoming QBC. Speaking of brighter days ahead, it is jumping off this Saturday, which I am super excited to be back for the second year in a row hosting the QBC. And there's a lot of familiar faces. If you've been to the QBC before, which I know Baseball and BBQ has, it's where we met. But also a lot of familiar faces if you watch and listen to our show. It's a long day of Mets excitement. It starts at 10:30 a.m. and we don't wrap until about 6 o'clock. And just run through obviously some of this stuff could change. People get there late and things like that. But the order of operations, there'll be a State of the Mets panel hosted by Mark Healy, which is great. Then there will be the thing that I'm looking forward to the most in terms of listening to, which is the R.A. Dickey panel hosted by Roger Clark. Roger, of course, of New York One, former guest on this show. Then R.A. Dickey will do a little signing. Then we're going to get SNY's very own The Mets Pod, which, of course, has Joe DeMayo on board and former guest of this show as well. And then we've got two former guests of this show hosting a panel together, which is Hojo, who was our most recent guest, and Lori Rubinson from WFAN. So she'll be conducting an interview with him. Then we're going to get an award presented to the one and only Jay Horowitz, and whatever award it may be, it is worth it for Jay because he is the best person in the world. Then we've got the Hojo signing. Then we've got the SNY presents the Mets Hot Stove. Maybe it'll be Cold Stove. Who knows? With John Harper, Gary Apple, and Sal Licata. And then the thing that I'm looking most forward to from a personal standpoint of things that I get to do, I will be hosting the interview with the one and only Bartolo Colon. So that's going to be awesome. And then we'll kind of close it out with the NY Post Amazing But True podcast before we sign off. So it's going to be a great day. Anybody who's ever been to the QBC before, you know that there's a lot of excellent stuff that goes on throughout the day. And it's not just the panels, it's the interaction with other Mets fans. And it's the signed memorabilia, if that's your thing, that people can get their hands on. It's the artwork. Dave Maggio does some great paintings and pencil drawings he's done of Keith and Todd Frazier, and he designed Todd Frazier's cleats that he used his last year in the league. So, you can get your hands on some really great artwork. Some great sponsors: SNY, New York Post, Coney Island Brewing Company. They are the official craft beer of the QBC. The Seven Line, of course, our friends over at Seven Line, Catch Astoria, and 4 Points by Sheridan, which is where the event is actually taking place. Last year, we went over to out on Long Island, which was cool, but it's nice to be within a stone's throw of Citi Field, which maybe if Steve Cohen gets his way, we can have a permanent home somewhere in that area because it won't be all hotels and chop shops. Maybe it'll actually be appointment viewing. So yeah, looking forward to it.
That's all. Yeah. I mean, there's one thing I will say. I'm upset because I did have plans to go this year. I'm upset that I can't. Some things had come up, and I'm not going to be able to make it. I wanted to, mainly because I heard the way that you talked about it, and it was actually one of the first things that I had. Who was it? It was you on the QBC channel when I first found out we were going to be doing a show together. I searched out your stuff to get an idea of who you were. So I like the whole idea of seeing and meeting other Mets fans or meeting people from Mets Twitter. Like that whole thing like really excited me. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it this year. So hopefully I can make it out to the next one. But it seems like it's going to be an awesome time. Anytime you can just kick back and have a couple of drinks and get an autograph or two and just hang out and talk Mets is always a good day. So I guarantee you guys are going to have an awesome time.
Yeah. And look, we talked about it. I would love to have you out there so we could do a little something. Obviously there's already 2 podcasts represented and we don't want to like bog it down. But it would be great to have you there because a lot of times when we're filling in between panels as we're getting ready to set up, kind of, and Baseball and BBQ can attest to this. One of the things that I started doing is basically kind of holding this open forum that now, you and I have done with our show as we've gone to the live stream. We have people in the comments and stuff like that. Whereas the other shows are kind of, and I'm not saying this to demean them at all, but like they're up there to do their podcast. They're up there, they're talking, and a lot of times they don't take questions, during because they're recording and stuff like that. So I'll go up there and I'm like, hey, we heard Joe DeMeo talk about Ronnie Mauricio. You guys in the crowd, what do you think of it? Come up here, let's talk about it, let's break it down. So there would have been some opportunities for you and I to do that fun stuff, but listen, I will do my best to not make a fool of the show and myself. I will do my best to not argue with people. Well, because all of the Q&As with the former players, all the interviews with the former players usually have a little Q&A attached to them on the back end. Hey, you got any questions for Todd Frazier, who we had last year? Got any questions for Bartolo? Stuff like that. But sometimes the other panels just kind of, they're big. There's a lot of people involved. Tim Ryder's going to be there, a former guest of the show as well. And there's so many people that, sometimes you don't have time for those Q&As. So I do like to try to invite some of the fans to just kind of say their piece and get their thoughts out there. Also, Tim Healy is going to be there, a really good beat writer. So, listen, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be giveaways. There were giveaways last year. There was Mets Make a Deal. We might do that again. So some cool stuff, man. I'm looking forward to it. I'm flying in literally just for this event. So shows you how much I appreciate it and really love doing it and connecting with other Met fans.
And hopefully when you fly in, you can get yourself a nice bagel as opposed to a bagel like you eat out there in L.A. based off the guy that you chose to claim as your own. You did. I'm sorry, but I had to say it because I just needed to.
Listen, and for everybody who's watching this is like a total inside joke between myself and Ibby. But if you're on TikTok or Instagram, because sometimes it comes over as a reel, but I've seen it a few times. There's this dude who's like, sorry, New York, LA makes the best bagels. And I was like, pause. What? Okay. Now let me just be clear. There is an unbelievably good, there are actually 2. And then there's a third one that's kind of like a lot of people like, I'm like, it's lesser than the other 2, but there are 2 great bagel places here in Los Angeles, not far from where I live. But Ibby, they're still not New York bagels. Like they're close. One of them in particular is like, it might as well be a New York bagel. But the thing that frustrates me is that, anybody who lives on the East Coast, and you kind of get used to the fact that you can go to the bagel shop, you could order a bagel with cream cheese, you're out of there in 4 seconds. It's like $1.25. You order a bacon, egg, and cheese, it's $4.50, whether you get it on a bagel or a hard roll. I go to places out here, I order a bacon, egg, and cheese. First of all, when I'm done with it, I'm still hungry. Second of all, it's good, but it's not filling. Second of all, it's like $14, dude. I'm like, it's a bacon, egg, and cheese. Like bagels are supposed to be fast and quick. I need to get in, get out. I need to get in, get out. Yeah. So that's what Ibby is alluding to. But no, look, there's a couple of places out here that I love. make really good bagels, not bagels. I don't know what that dude's deal is. But they're still, it's not New York. And baseball and BBQ going for the obvious, I guess, for him response, which is go for barbecue instead. Also making a good point that some of the past Q&As are on YouTube, meaning
those,
from the Queens Baseball Convention. So by the way, tickets are like, there's usually a late run of tickets, and that's where we're at right now. I checked in with Keith while we were recording the show, and there's still some tickets left, but this week, the week of, there's usually a big run on them after Thanksgiving. So if you head on over to queensbaseballconvention.com, you can get tickets, and I would suggest if you're planning on coming, you do that sooner rather than later, because last year we had a very big space. I don't know how this space compares in terms of size, but last year we were at Mulcahy's in Wantagh, and it's tremendous in there, and we sold it out. So that's one thing people want to keep an eye out for. That's it.
Yeah, I got nothing else. No final thoughts. No, in terms of, all right, we always do our little final thoughts. I got nothing else other than, let's just hope that we get some sort of action for the sake of the QBC. I'll keep it on brand here. For the sake of the QBC and that hot stove, even though there are some clowns on that stove, I won't call out names, but in terms of the hot stove itself, hopefully there is something to talk about, because look, we all have fun. Mets fans have fun. They can have fun in terms of the hypotheticals and the what ifs, but it's a lot more fun when you can actually talk about something that you have and you can look forward to because you have it in tow and ready to go. So hopefully something can happen over the next couple of days. I will say a prayer for you guys so you have something to talk about.
Hopefully, because I don't know if I can talk about Eric Chavez for another 45 minutes to an audience of live people. I just don't know if I can do it. Everybody here is, of course, live, but you don't have to we don't have to see each other's faces as all the joy dips from them, in minute 15 of talking about the Mets bench coach again. So, listen, it'd be always a pleasure to do this show with you, even when things aren't, just a complete beehive of activity around our Mets. So this is great. And I am looking forward to seeing some new folks, meeting some new people at the QBC this weekend, and of course, reconnecting with some old friends there. But either way, we will be back doing our show, which is called Till Mets Do Us Part, next week in the same time slot, 4 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, live on Twitter, live on YouTube. And of course, if you missed the episode, you can watch the entire thing as soon as we end the broadcast over on our YouTube channel, which is called Till Mets Do Us Part. You can follow us across all social media platforms at Till Mets Do Us Part, or look at the bottom of our screen and find our handles for each one of our respective personal pages and all that good stuff. And you can listen to the audio version of this show starting tomorrow morning, all courtesy of the Chop Sports Network, wherever it is you get your podcast. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. We'll see you guys next week.